The unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect truth is seldom met with, even in 100,000 myriad kalpas. Now we can see and hear it. We can remember and accept it. I vow to make the Buddha's truth one with myself. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha. So today I'd like to talk about regret. I think when we come to the practice, there's often this first flush of excitement. We may remember this well, the excitement of perhaps hearing the Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha for the first time. There's also the excitement of practicing with like-minded people, maybe being on retreat, and seeing how, when we put the teachings into practice, they make a very real difference in our life. And actually, it can be such a revelation. And it can be a bit of a surprise after the first flush to find ourselves back in some of our negative mind states, revisiting our mistakes from the past, and especially those of our youth. It's normal, when we begin a formal meditation practice, that our mistakes begin to arise. Sometimes in the arising of mistakes, we realize that we have an opportunity to make amends. Sometimes, though, what arises and can continue to arise in our practice is a whole lot of regret. In today's talk, I'd like to look at how regret can arise in training, the difference between regret and remorse, and the antidotes we can apply when we find ourselves going over and over the same old mistakes. So according to the Buddha, restlessness and regret comprise one of the 5 hindrances to spiritual progress because they hinder the mind and obstruct spiritual development. The 5 hindrances spoken of by the Buddha are sensual desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, restlessness and regret, and that's sometimes translated as remorse, and skeptical doubt. And I think that the reason that restlessness and regret are one of the 5 hindrances is because, when we've made some serious mistakes, we tend to go over and over in our minds what we've done. And I've found that sometimes it can actually be quite hard to let go of. And though, others may have forgiven us, long since, sometimes we may not be able to do so. So when we begin meditating, it might seem like all of our regrets and mistakes come flooding back to us. And I think regret in particular can be a powerful force. We might regret something we've said or done, something we haven't done. For example, we might have been too scared to do what we felt was right in a situation, or we ignored something we wish we hadn't. It could also be regret in how we've spent our time. Maybe we feel we wasted a big chunk of our lives somehow. And the regret might also manifest in our past relationships, how we treated a partner or family members, co-workers, etc. And if these regrets keep coming up over and over, I think it is good to look at whether we've done everything we can to help the situation, keeping in mind, of course, that we still have to bear the karmic consequences of whatever we've done. What I think isn't helpful, though, is this rehashing of our past deeds and the turbulence that it stirs up in the mind, by forever dwelling on and feeding the regret. On the subject of nourishing regret, the Buddha said, "There is unrest of mind, frequently giving unwise attention to it. That is the nourishment for the arising of restlessness and regret that have not yet arisen, and for the increase and strengthening of restlessness and regret that have already arisen." And I think that the important piece here is in seeing our own part in the nourishment of the arising of the restlessness and regret, and how by our own actions, this unwise attention, as the Buddha called it, we strengthen that regret in our mind. In the Samyutta Nikaya, the Buddha uses a simile to offer teaching on the mental hindrance of restlessness and regret. He says, "If there is water in a pot, stirred by the wind, agitated, swaying, and producing waves, a man with a normal faculty of sight could not properly recognize and see the image of his own face. In the same way, when one's mind is possessed by restlessness and regret, overpowered by restlessness and regret, one cannot properly see the escape from restlessness and regret that have arisen. Then one does not properly understand one's own welfare, nor that of another, nor that of both, and also texts memorized a long time ago do not come into one's mind, not to speak of those not memorized." And I think that in this passage, the Buddha is pointing to this all-consuming quality of restlessness and regret, that when we engage with and nourish this attitude of mind, we become blinded both to a way through the regret, but also, how we can help ourselves and others. Because sometimes I think it can be much easier to take refuge in that which hurts, in our mistakes, our regrets, than to let go and look up and take refuge in the three treasures. When our dark states of mind become familiar, it can sometimes feel like an old friend. But in reaching for these dark states of mind, the despair, the regrets, we give these states of mind more energy, and we may fail to see how we can help ourselves and other beings while dwelling in this place. So according to the Oxford Dictionary, regret is characterized by a feeling of sorrow or disappointment at an occurrence or inability to comply. While remorse, on the other hand, is deep regret for a wrong committed, coming from a Latin root meaning to bite. And I think, spiritually, there is a difference in these two when they arise. I would argue that regret has a quality in training where there's a me at the center of it all. I made a terrible mistake. I should have stepped in. I wish I'd gone to college, etc., etc. Whereas with remorse, there's a recognition, that we've hurt beings and really a wish to do better. I think the difference is subtle, but also an important one, because when there's remorse, there can also be contrition. I think by virtue of being human and having lived our lives, we will likely have regrets. And as I mentioned, if the same old regrets keep arising, it's probably a good idea to look at, why they keep arising and to see if there's anything one can do to help the situation. But when regret arises, what can we actually do with it? How can we convert it? The first antidote that might help is to treat the arising of regret the same as we would any strong feelings that arise in meditation. The scriptures say, neither come too close nor put yourself too far away. And just so with regret, we don't grasp after it as it arises, nor do we push it away. We simply try to allow it to be there, and just in our allowing it to be there, we don't add additional fuel to the fire. We don't nourish it. And this allows it eventually to dissolve. This is, of course, in a nutshell, our basic practice of meditation. Another antidote for the arising of regret is in applying our practice of mindfulness to everyday life as much as possible. With the arising of any difficult mind states, it's helpful if we can see, what our mind is getting up to in the first place. If we have a firm foundation in formal meditation, it becomes much easier to practice mindfulness, which incidentally is just paying attention to what our mind is doing. the Buddha points out to us that it is the frequently giving it unwise attention that is the problem. The regret and the restlessness arise and may continue to arise, but the important thing is in what we do with it. When we can bring our practice of mindfulness to daily life, we have a much better chance of not getting lost in our thoughts, adding more and more fuel to that fire. So what is a firm foundation in meditation, you might ask? For me, a firm foundation in meditation is when we make formal meditation an essential part of everyday life, just as we would brush our teeth and wash our face. Meditation, when done daily, lays the ground for a firm foundation, and when we make a commitment to meditate every day, even if it's just for a short period, I think that this benefits us really in a way that meditating once a week cannot. So if we find we have a lot of regret, especially things done during our youth, one of the most helpful antidotes we can apply is compassion. I think it's so easy to judge ourselves by today's standards, but by what we know now. Perhaps we've even taken the precepts. So when we look back, I think it sometimes can be a bit difficult to look at what we got up to. So we might ask ourselves, if a friend had done something similar in former days, would we be so judgmental, so unwilling to forgive? Probably not. And why is it so much easier sometimes to forgive others than ourselves? Sometimes just recognizing that we did the best we could in the situation, even if things didn't turn out how we hoped. Really, if we had known better, we would have done better. Applying the antidote of compassion can also mean seeing the inherent compassion of the situation we regret. Now and again, I still think back to a time when I was a teenager, when I sent an unkind letter to someone. I was fairly upset about something. And when I found out later how that letter had affected the person, I was so ashamed of myself. It just filled with complete regret and remorse. Because actually it was in seeing the harm that I had caused that I knew I couldn't do that again. And that was the compassion, to see the harm I'd caused and vowing not to repeat it. And this may sound strange to some, but for myself, when I look back at some of the mistakes I've made, and when regret arises, I try to look at it as a gift that brought me ultimately to Buddhist practice. Because I know if it wasn't for all the restlessness and regret and difficulties I experienced in one way or another, I don't think I would have been compelled to come to the practice, to turn the heart around, to make a commitment to do something about myself. Applying the Buddhist teaching on regret, we can see that we have this precious opportunity to learn from our mistakes, but not to dwell on nor nourish them. Otherwise, we're forever beating ourselves over the head with the same old cudgel, which really gets us nowhere. Compassion is great enough to hold all our judgments, all our mistakes and regrets, if we can make room for it. Sometimes I think of compassion as a Venn diagram, that's Venn. If you remember that from math, that's bigger than anything we can imagine, an infinite circle. Except in this diagram, there's nothing that can ever be outside of the set. And everything is held within it. There is nothing excluded. Nothing's excluded, including everything that we could possibly have ever done. So no matter what we have done, what we regret doing or not doing in our lives, the arising of regret can be a catalyst for turning the heart around, for recognizing our unskillful actions of body, speech, and mind, and using this regret for the good. Regret can, in fact, be the seed for a good old-fashioned conversion story. Of course, I love the story of Angulimala from the time of the Buddha. We've told that story many times. My other favorite story, illustrating the turning the heart around, is Beyond the Pale of Vengeance, which I think, of course, many people will have read or have a copy of. This was actually the first Dharma book that I ever read. And for those of you who don't know, this is a novel based on a true story and takes place in 18th century Japan. So the story opens with the protagonist, Ichikuro, a young servant. He gets into a fight with his master. His master has accused him of having an affair with the favorite concubine named Oyumi, which he has done. And in the course of the fight, Ichikuro ends up killing the master. And as he sees his body lying there on the floor, he realizes his terrible mistake. And, it's a heinous crime in Japan to kill one's master, so he gets ready to kill himself. Just at that moment, Oyumi, the concubine, she comes out from the shadows and convinces him that actually the two of them should run away together. So that's what they do. They run away together and they open up a tea house. Probably selling tea is not making very much money, so Ichikuro, he starts in on a new line of business, and this is in robbing and killing travelers who come to the area. And at first he just targets old men and merchants, and he doesn't really have any problem doing this. I guess because they're nearing the end of their lives. But then one evening, this young couple comes past the tea house and they invite them in. And Ichikuro and Oyumi, they give the couple the wrong information about the distance they still have to travel. They send them on their way, and Ichikuro, he gets dressed up, he puts on a disguise, and he sets off to ambush them. And he comes around the corner, he sees them coming, and he jumps out and he demands their money. Well, at first, he wasn't intending on killing them. All he wanted was their money, and he's wearing this disguise. But the young fellow, he resists. He doesn't want to give the money. And in fact, he recognizes Ichikuro. He knows he's the fellow from the tea house. So at that point, Ichikuro knows that he has no choice but to kill him. So with a pang, he kills the fellow, and then he turns to the young lady. He also has serious misgivings about killing her. He really doesn't want to do it, but he knows he has to. There's no other way, otherwise he'll be caught. So he kills the woman as well. After he's killed the couple, he's overcome by fear and remorse, and he can't believe what he's done. Even so, he takes the money, which incidentally is less than he had been hoping for. He takes off their expensive clothing. He forgets the woman's hair pieces, which apparently are worth quite a bit of money, and he goes back to the tea house. And of course, when he gets back to the tea house, Oyumi can't believe that he's forgotten the hair pieces, and she berates him. And she tells him he needs to go back and get the hair pieces, but he refuses. So in her greed, she runs off to get them. He's so disgusted by the whole event and by what he's done. He throws everything aside and he runs. He flees into the night. He runs for 50 miles before he gets to a Buddhist temple. At the temple, he confesses to the abbot all of the crimes he's committed. And instead of giving himself up to the authorities, which he had planned on doing, the abbot convinces him to ordain as a monk instead, so that he can lead a life dedicated to helping beings, including himself. In his new life as a monk, he's called Ryokai, and he sets out to do various good deeds to help, those around him, especially travelers. So he does things like patch potholes and carry people's bags and be of assistance in any way that he can. And one day he comes upon a place called the Chain Bridge, where there's been an accident. He finds out someone has come to violent death as a result of, their horse is spooked, and the two of them, they fall down into this canyon. And the idea comes to him that to atone for his crimes, he could cut a 400-yard tunnel through a cliff near the Chain Bridge to make a safe route for travelers to pass. Of course, the villagers think he's a complete idiot. They think he's a fraud. They won't support him in any way. They won't give him any money. They think he's a fool. So he decides for himself, okay, well, I'll start on the work myself. And that's exactly what he does. With a stonemason's hammer and chisel, he begins to chip away at the rock. And it's slow progress. After 1 year, he's made 10 feet of progress. The villagers continue to laugh at him. After 3 years, the villagers stop mocking him, now begin to sympathize him. During the day, he would have to stop and go out and beg for food and then come back. But the villagers decide to start leaving food outside the cave so that he doesn't have to go begging. After 4 years of work, only 50 feet have been chiseled out of the mountainside. After 9 years, he's completed 44 yards, 132 feet out of 400 yards. And at this point, the villagers, they actually begin to pity him. So they collect some money and they hire, I think, 10 stonemasons to begin helping him, which they do. But then after a year, the villagers get tired of supporting this project and the stonemasons gradually leave. So again, Ryokai is back working on chiseling out the mountain, making the tunnel all on his own. By the 18th year, half the tunnel is complete. And it's finally at this point that the villagers, they stop doubting his ability, and his dedication to the project. So they collect some more money. They hire 30 stonemasons to begin helping with the tunnel. And meanwhile, in a plot twist, the master that Ichikuro murdered at the beginning of the story, he'd had a son, and the son reappears in the plot. The son is now a full-grown man, and he's been trained as a samurai. And of course, his life mission now is to find Ichikuro to avenge the disgraced family. It takes him 9 years to find Ichikuro, but after looking high and low, he finally finds him. And he confronts the monk, telling him that he's there to avenge his father's death. And of course, Ryokai, who's been practicing all these years, he tells him he's ready. Go ahead and kill me, he says. He's ready to die for the benefit of others. And I think when the son sees the monk, who at this point is a bit disheveled, his hair is long and he's getting much older. The son has some misgivings, but nonetheless he gets ready to take revenge. But all of a sudden, Ryokai is surrounded by a group of the stonemasons, who vow to protect him. And they tell the son that actually the local villagers see him as a manifestation of Jizo Bodhisattva. And then what ensues is, arguments between the stonemasons and the son. The son agrees eventually that Ryokai can finish his life's work. But as soon as the tunnel breaks through, the son is allowed to complete his mission of vengeance, to kill Ryokai. So the stonemasons, they give him this little cottage that he can go stay in while they're completing the work. And the son gets impatient. And after several nights, he leaves the cottage and determined he's going to end it. He's going to kill Ryokai while he's in the tunnel. And he gets his sword ready and he creeps through the tunnel. And as he's getting closer and closer to Ryokai, he hears the chink, chink, chink of the chiseling. And as he gets really close, he can also hear that the old monk is chanting scriptures all the while he's doing the chiseling. And of course, at that point, he can't go forward with the attack. It's just inconceivable. So what happens next is, in order, since the son can't kill Ryokai, he decides that he'll help finish things up. He begins working alongside Ryokai and the stonemasons. And by some miracle, as the son is working shoulder to shoulder with Ryokai, his anger begins to dissipate. And soon, what we see in the story is the two of them, the son and Ryokai, working shoulder to shoulder in complete dedication through the night on a regular basis in order to complete the project. And 18 months later, we're told in the story, at midnight, Ryokai makes his last chisel into the mountainside, and it breaks open. And he weeps tears of joy after all these years. It was 21 years total in the story after having begun the project. And then Ryokai, at this point, he turns to the son, and he urges him at that point to kill him so that he can be reborn into the pure land of the Western Paradise. But of course, at this point, the vengeance is inconceivable. And we see how the master's son, too, has also turned his heart around. He's so moved by the dedication of Ryokai's practice to helping other beings. And that's the end of the novel. But I will mention that, of course, this novel is based on a true story, and though what we know is that it actually took 15 years to complete the tunnel, and that we know the part of the story pertaining to the son may or may not have been the creation of the author. So to end, and going back to regret, regret can become a hindrance to our practice when we open the door for it and invite it in with open arms. The more that we give unwise attention to it, the more our regrets get stirred up in the mind, and the more we stir up regrets not yet arisen. But by paying attention to what our mind gets up to, applying meditation and mindfulness to daily life, we have all the tools that we need in order to deal with whatever difficult mind states arise, regret or otherwise. And if we do not nourish the regret, it can actually be used for the good. Regret can be a seed to bring forth good fruit, because it can also be a catalyst for turning the heart around, as we see in the story Beyond the Pale of Vengeance. Regret can be a gift in our practice when we don't dwell continuously on it, nor feed it, but rather use it to do something about ourselves. When regret and remorse arise, when we can be still, we allow the heart of great compassion to spring forth from within, and by so doing, we can help ourselves and all living beings. Thank you very much. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha.